Okay, so I mentioned at the end of the last video that we'd be looking at workflows, and we are going to do that, but before that, I want to go through 4 different tracks, looking at their structure in depth and doing a little bit more than we did just with the structure type videos. So we're going to look at 2 trance tracks and 2 house tracks. The first track we're going to look at is Sanity Dub by Ronsky Speed. And as you can see, I've done a fair bit in terms of analyzing the track. So I'm going to explain here what I've done so you can do the same if you please. And the best way to learn this stuff is, as I mentioned earlier, is to analyze and study tracks yourself. But this is a method I use. So the first thing I did was I split the track into each major section or phrase. So this could be when a new element came in, when the energy dropped for a break, or anything significant. So this is not titling stuff as verse, chorus, bridge, that kind of thing, but rather just noting or notating each part. So you can see here, instead of calling this an intro, I've just said drums, effects, and stab, and that's really what happens. And then the next section here has a quotation mark, which signifies that everything in the last phrase is included and keeps playing. But I've got a plus symbol and then a bass, because that's what happens. So I keep these pretty basic. You want to keep them basic to save time, and also because there's a limit to how much notation you can do in your DAW. But really, it's a good way to get a bird's eye view of how the artist is adding and removing elements. And the more you do something like this, the more intuitive that knowledge becomes. So when you're producing your own music, you'll think, well, I could take this element away. I remember that in this song, that's what they did, and it worked very well. I could add an element here, and I could do that for 8 bars. So you get the idea. That's what I did there. And this is quite an interesting track. As you can see, quite a lot going on. Now the next thing I did was I copied out a basic structure. And here basically I just did what we've done with the structure types, which is verse, chorus, and so on. And I made it very basic, so I haven't split up the verse. I haven't split it up into 2 different sections. And finally I made a song map underneath this video. Underneath this track. That we looked at that in the last video, if you're not sure what that is. Now the structure of this track is pretty straightforward in terms of trance. It's quite similar to some of the other tracks we looked at in the trance structure video. But what's interesting about this is that it doesn't really have a bridge. The mid part contains the main melody that's played throughout the chorus, and that doesn't really go away. So in a lot of trance you'll hear, you might have a bridge, and you might have a main idea, and then that main idea might disappear as the song builds up, and then it will appear again in the chorus. But in this song, we basically kick into the main idea straight away. So that's lowering the energy from the verse, and then we have this. So we hear that melody. And then the energy is increased, and even more so. And even in this build-up, we have the same thing. And then in this build-up, it disappears for a bit. And then the climax, we have that piano melody again. So what you could call this, you could call it a breakdown chorus instead of just a chorus. But I've called it a chorus because it contains the same melodic elements as this chorus over here. And this is where this whole basic structure thing, or this bass structure, falls short, because it doesn't do a good job of describing what's going on, whereas this does. I've said main ideas introduced, I've said extra, there's bit extra, plus drums, tension built, and then climax, and then extra after that. What's interesting about this, but it's not uncommon, is the main melody is actually pulled out during the pre-chorus. And this is a good way to sort of tease the listener. The listener gets used to hearing the melody, and they want to hear it in relation to everything else, the bass and the kick, that superb low end that they heard earlier in the song. But then it's withdrawn, and it causes tension, causes excitement, and also anticipation. Now, a note on tension and energy in this song, starting with tension. There's a big use of silence in this, especially in this early part here. You can see, if we play this, silence is used to add tension. And I call that silence, even though there's a reverse crash cymbal going on there. Like I said earlier, in the tension and energy video, silence does not necessarily mean no sound at all. Also, abstract effects. There's a lot of abstract effects going on if you listen to this song. Now, in terms of energy levels, what I love about this track is its huge dynamic range and energy. You know, the climax sounds absolutely massive in comparison to this very low energy, subtle breakdown where there's just a piano going on. Now, what also caught my attention was the 16 bar section at bar 81, which lowers the energy quite drastically. If we play this. It's very hard to pull off a 16 bar section like that without the listener getting bored. Now, you might be wondering why on this track that I've lowered the energy on this extra part of the chorus. It's true that there's a bit more going on there. The vocal chops and the atmosphere happen. So here we don't have any vocal chops. Over here we do. So there is more going on. But as a listener, I feel that the energy almost always drops after that first 16 unless the producer deliberately tries to counter it. And you know, this isn't a bad thing in this case. You want your climax to be a climax. And this part here is definitely the highest point of the track. It's the peak. So just a few unique points about this track. The first is that there's a lot of underlying complexity in layers. It feels like it's quite simple, you know, you've got a melody, you've got a few vocal chops, big bass line, percussion, but there's a lot of effects going on constantly, which just add this full layer of complexity and keep the whole track interesting. Also, the length of the breakdown compared to how energetic the track is, you know, you've got a very long breakdown here, but it seems to hold up in terms of energy, even though it's very low. And also the extreme variance in energy levels. We've got quite a lot of low energy here and high energy here, and this is probably also high as well. So that's a quick look at Sanity Dub. In the next video, we're going to be looking at the Thrill Seekers remix of Bring Back the Sun by John O'Callaghan and Audrey Gallagher, which is quite a different track. So I'll see you then.